Okay, my friends, lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I had a talk with a different title that was all queued up. It was beautiful. Excellent graphics, gorgeously done, polished. I thought about it for a long time. It was based on existing publications, thousands of hours of work. And then I thought, no, I don't want to talk about that. I'm going to talk about something else. So I so apologize. But now you'll get this crazy half-cocked discussion that is designed to comment on strategic questions. But in the wake of spending a lot of time talking with animal advocates over the last week and a half at a series of workshops, it struck me as particularly important to think about this question of exactly what we should be hoping to get out of AI for animals in the relatively short term. And so I'm pivoting to this strategic question. Please forgive me. However, the bright side for all of you, there'll be so much to criticize, right? So think of this as an opportunity to see an open target and really take your best shots and enjoy. It's a good time for us all. Now, I want to do two things by way of setup for thinking about this particular topic. The first thing to say is that I really want to focus on the question of what we should try to get out of relatively autonomous AI systems or AI systems used by people who do not share animal-friendly values. Okay, so Vladimir just gave us this wonderful example of what someone who actually cares about animals can do with AI. Tremendous, right? I'm in, fantastic, exactly what I want to see. I myself have tried to use AI in some ways to promote the kind of work that I'm interested in doing. However, I don't know if you noticed this, Vladimir cares a lot about animals, so do I. And unsurprisingly, we are able to get pretty useful results out of AI for our purposes in animal advocacy. However, that does not mean, right, that we're going to get the same kind of results when other people who are not as animal friendly are using AI models. And so the interesting question for me is not what we can individually do with the AI as people who share these sorts of values, but rather what kinds of things we should expect to get out of AI that is either autonomous, designed to set up and run, say, a recommender system that has been a digital assistant helping you set up your lunch appointments, or say a system that's designed to do precision livestock farming or what have you. So that's the kind of system that I'm interested in, one that is not being immediately directed by folks like us. The second thing is that I am assuming that the arguments of many philosophers over the last nearly 50 years are basically correct of the following type, which is even if you give relatively modest levels of consideration to animals, you get quite dramatic conclusions. Which is to say, you don't have to go for full anti-speciesist, total utilitarianism, like whatever heavyweight moral conclusions you might be sympathetic to, you don't have to actually go for those to get dramatic conclusions. If you look at the kinds of arguments that philosophers have been making for a long time, they've said, oh, well, even if you think there's some presumption against causing unnecessary suffering, right, which seems like a pretty modest moral assumption if ever there were one, then you would get these dramatic conclusions for animals, right? So I'm assuming that that's correct. If you don't think that's correct, then you've got lots of reason to be skeptical of some of the things that I'm going to say, but I'm going to take that on. We can talk about that assumption if you would like. Okay, so the title of the new talk is this idea, animal-friendly AI is misaligned AI. Let me just say now one word about this, which is I take it that the main task, or one of the main tasks that we have had with respect to autonomous AI systems is to align them in some sense to human values, that is to say, the values of a handful of people in San Francisco. And we are looking, what we're doing when we say that is we have some expectation that the values need to, or the behavior of AI, the way that AI operates and the recommendations that it makes somehow match some set of human considerations that we take to be relatively non-negotiable. Now, there's going to be some flexibility, so you might have a more or less progressive AI system. You might have one that is sort of pushing various kinds of progressive values that we care about, say it's anti-racist or it's anti-sexist or what have you. But background assumption is we are doing this kind of curve fitting exercise, right? That's what alignment is. And then we just get this sort of somewhat boring, that I think obvious observation that an animal-friendly AI would ipso facto not be an aligned AI, because even modest levels of consideration for animals lead to these dramatic conclusions that, in fact, the majority of human beings have no interest in, right? So that is the sad and unfortunate situation. With that in mind, now let's see if I can, here we go. So now let's consider, so this is the bold, unvarnished, unsophisticated, non-Andreas style version of the question, right? So just consider all these things we might want to get AI to do for animals. Again, qualifications when people without animal-friendly values are using the system, or when it's acting more or less autonomously. How would we get AI to do that thing? And then the options are like not that complicated. Basically, it's going to come down to either training data or your reinforcement system. Those are the things you're going to do, right? So you're somehow going to get, and this is what animal ethics has been working on, right? Giving this big animal-friendly set of training data to a model that would allow it to spit out these nice animal-friendly conclusions. And that's great, right? Or you get a bunch of people who are good at, they're being paid pennies per month to reward the model when it spits out particular kinds of answers, and you can get it to say give more animal-friendly sorts of results. And here's the problem, right? Yeah, sure, we can totally do it with the animal-friendly data set, but then it won't be aligned, and no one's going to use it, right? Not literally no one, of course. Obviously, I will go use it. I'll be like, oh, this is fantastic. I'm so pleased to have all of my beliefs validated by this model. But the people we actually want to use this, right? The folks who we are trying to have, have their choices influenced by an animal-friendly AI, or to have farming influence in some way by a more welfare-focused AI, right? They are not going to adopt, for the basic reason that their goals would so clearly not be served that it would be not in their interest at all to use it. And then we get exactly the same problem on the other side, right? So suppose that what we want is animal-friendly training, and various ways this can go badly, but we're ultimately going to end up at the exact same spot, right? We're going to end up at the spot where either we don't have those people, or no one is going to pay them because they're themselves not animal-friendly, or we're going to end up where, yep, we in fact achieved it, but we can't get a widespread adoption. So I take it, by the way, what I'm saying here should not be massively controversial, minorly controversial in various ways, but I think thus far, not massively controversial. And then here you might think is a practical upshot for people who are strategizing about how best to use AI in the context of animals. Like, what should their background assumption be? Something like this, I think. Basically, we will get animal-friendly AI at roughly the rate that we get human or animal-friendly humans. And it turns out that rate is not the rate that I personally would prefer. It seems to be happening at a rather slow rate, if I may dare be so bold as to suggest. And what that means, right, is that we're going to perhaps need to temper our expectations with respect to what we can extract from AI for animals, at least in the relatively short term. Okay, so I think one objection that you might offer to this, I think a very reasonable objection, is to say, look, can't we use this to nudge people in various ways, right? Can we use this to at least push things along in a way that clearly improves things for animals? Because it obviously is the case that people put up less resistance to various things that don't actually fit their default behaviors when it comes via the context of choice architecture. So when we can set up a decision situation such that it favors the values they have, perhaps as more reflective individuals, not thinking about their immediate short-term interests, then we get better outcomes. Like, the classic example of this is having people default into savings plans rather than having to opt into their savings plan. And guess what? They save way more money and they're happier in the long term, as opposed to spending all of their money on lattes, as of course the millennials do. So, what we have here is a situation where we can get this kind of improvement perhaps via nudges. And I think the reply to this is, Yeah, sort of, but maybe there's some important complications for us to think about. And the way to get at this is think about just any concrete case. So think about the digital assistant that we might want to have. So here is Siri. You're all phones, hopefully you're not getting upset with it. You're wondering what's going on, right? So we've got Siri, and imagine that Siri were good, and like could actually do things. And it was going to be a digital assistant and make something like a lunch reservation for you, right? We're going to go have, Constance and I are going to go have lunch, and we say, okay, we want the digital assistant to choose a place for us because the animal advocacy movement has endless power and money. It's somehow convinced Google that what should happen is that it should have an animal-friendly bias in the training data or in the reward system. And so, given this choice, right, between Chick-fil-A and the Temple of Satan, which, by the way, if you've not been, you should go. So, given this choice, right, it seems like sure, if we have all these successes, we could end up in a situation where Chick-fil-A is not recommended and the Temple of Satan is, right? So maybe we could end up in a situation where we get that kind of nudging, right? That would be lovely. However, the more ordinary case is now going to be way less like that, right? Because actually, most people are not going to want to nudge toward the vegan place, right? They're not going to use the model that tells them to do that. They are going to be nudged toward one of these options. Now, of course, if Constance and I were having lunch, we would not choose between such disastrous options. But just for the sake of simplicity, right, we've got his Chipotle where you can get your barbacoa, and your chicken, so on and so forth, or Olive Garden where you can, have third-rate pasta that's littered with meat. And what on earth is it supposed to do? How is it supposed to make the decision in the context where people are actually choosing between options of these kinds? And I think what we see is that once we make the decisions more concrete, and we think about particular trade-offs, where what we want is some kind of system that is going to figure out, well, an expectation, what is the best thing to recommend given these kinds of individuals that will result in the most animal-friendly option, et cetera. However, once we recognize that the model can't give that much weight to animals, otherwise it's going to be seriously misaligned, we end up in this situation where now the model is actually going to be balancing a lot of considerations, right? It's not just going to be looking at the question of, what's best for animals? Because that's, even if we've got a pro-social model from this lovely, animal progressive tech company, they will not just be trying to figure out, well, what is the best thing to do for animals, because they are not giving the kind of weight to animals that would be required for animal interest to trump all else. Instead, what they will be doing is saying, hey, there are a long list of considerations for which we need to optimize in setting up this wonderful lunch appointment that you and I are going to have. And it's very unclear that we should expect animal interests to outweigh all of these other interests that our nice progressive pro-social model is going to have, such that we end up with the expected recommendation or the outcome that's best in expectation in terms of the meal that we are going to have is the thing that is the most animal friendly. So it's not, to be clear, the problem is not that we can't get animal welfare as one of the considerations that might matter. It's not that we can't get nudging. I do think we can do both of those things, right? However, the issue is that an aligned AI is not going to assign the kind of weight to animals such that it's regularly going to be the case, or at least that we should predict that it will be the case, that animal welfare will trump the wide range of considerations in normal cases. So in the situation, which is a very happy situation and not trivial and one we should hope for, where we have consumers who are quite willing to be nudged in very animal-friendly ways, right? Some small set of consumers will be available for that. But if we're thinking about some wider range, and of course that could be significant, right? In expectation, the number of individuals affected could be significant. But if we're thinking about the kind of thing that's available for mass use, or the kind of thing that we might use to say, ensure that welfare remains really high relative to other objectives like productivity in a precision livestock farming system, I think once we accept this constraint in terms of alignment, we're going to get low enough weights on animals that it will be very rare for us to get the optimal recommendation being one that favors animals. So I think we get this slightly revised upshot, still the casual version, right? Not all the caveats are there, but roughly it does. I think we can get, somewhat of a faster animal-friendly AI, but it's going to be a relatively modest pace, and it's going to be indexed basically to the rate of social change. So AI will not come in here as some kind of important savior. At best, it will be one toolkit in the larger advocacy toolkit, or one tool in the larger advocacy toolkit. And what we're going to do is look for cases where there is some willingness to be nudged. And we're going to accept that the nudges that we need to look for are relatively minor. Now, I don't think this necessarily means it can never be interesting or important, right? It's true that very small impacts that are pro-social for animals in the aggregate could mean lots of animals not raised in slaughter. It could mean that we get, non-trivial impacts overall, but they will only get dramatic at the rate that we see social change more broadly. And I will just say one more thing before we turn to questions. I do think when we think about the kind of nudging framework that we might want, one way of thinking about this is in terms of a more democratic approach to the values associated with AI. So one thing that you could think, and this is a view to which I have some sympathy, or for which I have some sympathy, is something along the following lines, that the goal here, eventually, when we're thinking about alignment, is to focus on the values that people have as voters rather than the values they have as consumers. So in the literature on human willingness to pay for animal welfare, you see this vote-buy gap, where everybody buys caged eggs, though they will vote for cage-free eggs, right? They will vote for policies that would force them to purchase the foods that they are not willing to spend the money on in the current environment. And so if it were possible, right, if it were possible to have our approach to alignment be focused on the way people vote rather than on the way people purchase and their immediate behavioral inclinations, that might give us a bit more latitude. Right now, that is not the way things are currently being done. And I don't think we have any sort of clear structure that would force these companies to focus on the collective voting behavior of consumers such that we could get more animal-friendly results. However, that might be insofar as we're looking for regulation of AI to begin with, and we think that democratically solicited values might be a part of that regulatory structure independently, that may be the kind of thing on which we ultimately want to rely when it comes to animals. But of course, it's a long road from here to there. Thanks so much.
Okay, so we actually have a lot of time questions, like nearly half an hour per question. So I'd love to open up the floor for discussion. I will start off.
Sure.
So I wonder if you've heard of democratic AI. This is something that I think Anthropic has worked on in conjunction with the Collective Intelligence Project, where they actually vote on AI values. Do you think that's an opportunity to start nudging it in an animal-friendly direction?
So I do on one level. So yes, obviously, as I was just suggesting at the end, I do think it's possible that this is the way that we push in more animal-friendly directions. My reservation is that democratic values, though I think they are more friendly to animals when we're comparing them to consumer behavior, it remains the case that when you sort of put the question to the public, how much are we going to prioritize animals relative to human interests? In all the surveys that I've seen about this, you still get about between 20% and a third of the population saying zero weight to animals. So when that's part of the baseline of the democratic populace, and of course that's in the US where there's standard of living are fairly high, and people are not facing, for socioeconomic reasons, nearly the same trade-offs between the interests of animals and the interests of humans. In those circumstances, I think we might get some benefit, but we should be, again, very modest about our expectations, given what we actually see in survey results about just how this interest. I mean, zero weight to animals is kind of stunning, right? And that if it's a big chunk of the population like that, that's going to have a significant impact on the way we see labs responding.
Thank you. We have a couple questions from the audience. We'll start off, Jonathan.
Yes. Yeah, thanks, Bob. We had some discussions of related issues at the October meeting as well, so it's good to have this chance to revisit them. I think one of the themes we were talking about there was that by far the easiest way to implement animal friendliness in AI would be through the constitutional AI approach, where they already have this list of values which the AI is then in effect training itself to conform to. And it would be an almost trivial change to add something like choose the answer that expresses the most concern for animals of these options. And then there's a sort of objection that gets raised where people say, well, you write that principle into the Constitution and a third of the public would disagree with it. But then, I mean, the point I was making to that at the previous meeting was that, well, tech companies are under no obligation to make these constitutional principles positions of wide actual agreement. I mean, they're private actors, they're not public institutions at all. And if their own company's values require certain commitments, there's absolutely nothing stopping them writing those commitments into the constitutions of their AI. And I sometimes feel as though this perceived need to cater to the third of the population. It comes in this context, but not in any of the other contexts with any of those other principles concerning racism, sexism, etc.
So first of all, I mean, totally agree that the truly democratic stuff is to some degree a red herring, given the fact that actors are, or that the relevant actors are private companies. That being said, they are businesses, right? They are trying to make money. They are responsive to widespread adoption. And my main response is just to pull back and think about, again, the nature of alignment. So I think there is a sense in which having people operate in accord with fairly progressive values can still be considered aligned, again, to a non-trivial subset of the population. That does stir up a lot of animus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But if you think that even mild consideration for animals has pretty dramatic conclusions, then I just find it very difficult to think that you're going to get anything other than quite radically misaligned AI from the perspective of even the fairly progressive members of the companies that we might want to influence. So yeah, sure, it's true that Gemini could just become, with the right people at the helm, a very animal-friendly tool, but the implications might be that they no longer have an adoptable tool.
Jim Culpa?
Thank you. Appreciate your framing of sort of like technological determinism is not going to guarantee moral progress any more than the cotton gin guaranteed the end of slavery, right? With humans. So, okay. And then, could the same thing be said about many people say that there should be healthcare for all children in the world. And so could we use AI for that normative direction? Right? So there's going to be the thing of, can you make an AI system that can actually be calibrated to that setting? And then will people use it or not? Right? So I would posit, and I'll present a little bit here later, is we already can generate every version of normatively calibrated. You want a Jesuit calibrated AI, you can have it. Right. You want a Sharia calibrated AI, you can have it. You want an animal-friendly AI, it's there today. So then the question is, who will use it in what situations, as you're saying? And maybe there's a spectrum where there are already a number of places where people are willing to do things that are animal-friendly, and we can empower people to use the systems in those. And maybe animal-friendly AI systems can sort of calculate hedonic calculuses more realistically for a bunch of places where we are willfully blind about it. And that could be part of a paradigm shift. That's a lot there, but over to you.
Yeah. All right. So that's great. On one level, what I want to say is, yes, totally. I agree. I'm painting here with a broad brush because I want to try to present the more bald version of the case and then see how we add the nuance to it. That being said, let me sort of give you a dining hall case. So university dining hall, this happened in my own university. And they had environmental targets. And they wanted to have animal welfare targets because student body was interested in this, and they were getting some pressure from the vegan club to, do something that was navigating this sort of issue. And so you might think that this is the optimal situation, right? We give them a model and they can spit out the menu recommendations that are optimized across these various considerations. Some environmental considerations, some animal welfare considerations, so on and so forth. And I readily concede that we might end up in the situation where the AI model is in fact doing something valuable, providing an important service that's relatively animal friendly, and it doesn't involve radical misalignment because we've sort of dialed back the value of animals to sort of just the right level, given the interests of the parties involved. However, I think the striking thing about that case is that it's again just AI moving at exactly the pace of social change, and it is it's facilitating menu creation in a way that is certainly useful and convenient, and implementation, of course, is often a barrier, right? But then it's also the case that there are tons of people who have already developed nice menu sets for college campuses that are animal friendly and that try to be sensitive to environmental considerations and social justice considerations, et cetera. AI is not actually significantly changing what was morally possible in that situation. AI is an implementation strategy for a group that was already prepared to make animal friendly choices. And actually, they could have done it without the AI, but it was way cooler if we do it with the AI. So I don't think it's necessarily a disagreement about the utility of the in practice, in fact, utility of AI in that situation. Rather, it's that the counterfactual impact, right? The impact relative to what would have happened independently, I think is probably not that significant. Jeff in the back.
Yeah, thanks for this talk, Bob. This is really great and I think helpful for us to be considering. I want to blanket endorse the past few exchanges because I think some of those ways of pushing back are good ways of pushing back, but then your responses are sensible. I wanted to ask a kind of follow-up question about the practical strategic upshot because you framed it as a kind of practical strategic talk. And as an empirical prediction, it seems plausible that how AI will develop will, broadly speaking, track, but maybe be a little bit out ahead of how society will develop, maybe a little bit more so than, say, food systems, but maybe the same rough structure. But I was maybe unconvinced by this sort of blanket practical upshot because in other contexts, even if this is our prediction about how things will develop in general, the strategic upshot for advocates and policymakers and other change makers is more pluralistic and complicated than that. The upshot is something like, we can expect that this is what will happen, but the way that we can make it happen as fast and as well as possible is by having some people kind of work with labs to create those incremental changes, and then other people stand outside of them and argue we should be doing much more, and then other people developing new technologies that they can use, and so on and so forth. And so I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about why we, capital W, we should limit our attempts to persuade companies to only embrace these nudges that people will be responsive to, rather than adopting more of a division of labor where some of us are still shouting that we should be doing much more, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, good. All right, so this is the most Jeff of all Jeff questions, and I just should readily concede. So Jeff's right. I'm very sympathetic to the view that he's describing here, which is at a strategic level, it's often good to have some level of pluralism. We want people who are envelope pushers. We want people who are in-system, friendly advocates, and the balance of those things is likely to be better than either one alone. And so this conclusion suggests that the in-system modest incremental reformers are the ones who are doing the most, is the work that we ought to be supporting. rather than the folks who are pushing for more radical change, recognizing that shifting the Overton window is a valuable part of advocacy work. Fair. I think my main concern is driven by background considerations that have not been, detailed here. So I have an overall view about the animal advocacy space where I think that the bulk of our wins have been, amounts of money. And yep, Ingrid Newkirk shut down some labs that were working on primates. And yeah, we've had some cases where we've gotten, Prop 12, the kind of political things that are possible when we've got ballot initiatives that are available to us. But that we have largely had a very small number of strategies that have been particularly successful. And that makes me worried when we sort of think about the highest level kinds of advocacy strategies that we might pursue, that although it sounds great, like in theory that we should have this pairing of these things, I'm very concerned about seeing that much impact on this other side. And it's like a community unifying hypothesis to be pluralistic. But I'm worried that it's not, in fact, the way that we've gotten the wins that we've gotten. And so I think I err very strongly on the side of this for sort of like based on priors and thinking, well, this is just one more case where we're going to see, insofar as we see change via these pretty modest methods where we get, modest campaigns for fairly minor reforms. That being said, you might say, well, you're suffering from a kind of street lamp problem. Yes, of course, we can't see the impact of the people who were only there to shift the Overton window, blah, 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 blah. And I grant you that. I think that the high level question is just, well, to what degree should we, like, when do we ever update on that? And, I think we've got enough evidence to update. But I take the point. It's a good challenge. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted just to point out, maybe for the sake of the room, that the definition of misalignment you're using is slightly different from the definition of misalignment that lots of AI alignment research is using. And to some extent, that exaggerates a disagreement between the animal community and the AI community. And a lot of the alignment community focuses on a question of control. That is there in any way an ability to get these AIs to do things which are intended rather than unintended, rather than exactly how they should do that? And so I think that's just important to point out because it's sort of there's less disagreement there, I think, it's suggested. A broader question. I have the sense that focusing on what AIs actually want to do or their direct suggestions to people is somewhat missing the point of what AI's effects on animals will be. In that, I think there are good arguments to expect that AI is going to transform society in many ways, partly by replacing human labor, partly, I think most importantly, by increasing the rate of progress of technological development. I think there are good arguments for this. You can look at the economics literature. I think it's the best place to look at this. Or Horton Konofsky's post on process for advancing scientific and technological advancements, process for automated development. I think that suggests that the primary effects of AI are actually going to be on technological progress. The most obvious place where that's going to affect animals is, in my mind, all proteins and clean meat. This suggests we should be expecting, if this suggestion is right, an increased plausibility of having clean meat within a shorter time frame than I think the animal community would currently think. And as a result, if you're thinking about what's the practical upshot for AI and animals, the real answer is try to maximize the adoption and how widespread the adoption is of clean meat when it arrives, rather than thinking about the direct sort of details of the specific AI system. I was wondering how you think these cases should be compared, if you think that's a sort of plausible approach.
Yeah. So first of all, let's just suppose that this basic story about technological progress is correct. I'm open to that, sympathetic to that. I think one of the main upshots is we don't actually need to do that much in terms of steering AI, and it also suggests that we don't need to worry that much about most of the other animal advocacy work that we might do. And so, yeah, sure. If you're confident enough that that's going to be the trajectory and that we're going to end up in that situation, and you think that we might get, either maybe we don't even need transformative AI for that, right? We might be something that's much more modest. right? You could think that, yeah, the worst problems that we face with respect to animal welfare will be resolved, say, in the next 25 years or something, due to a major ability to produce cheap and tasty animal product equivalents. If that's the case, it's also true that you probably shouldn't spend. I mean, that's like in some sense like not in tension with the question of whether we should be trying to modify these current models in animal-friendly ways to get them to make particularly animal-friendly recommendations. Because really, we're in a, we can sort of like take it easy. We can wait to see how we end up with this sort of major adoption, right? It would be strange to be focusing on really trying to make animal-friendly models if our theory of change is essentially, hey, look, no one will get that animal-friendly until they're not complicit in harm to animals. Once we get clean meat technologies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or just better plant-based, meat technologies, then people will not be complicit, and then we can have our animal-friendly AI, right? But that would also suggest, yeah, don't bother worrying about the recommender system. Now, you're right, absolutely, that like the main practical upshot of AI would not be in this sort of direct influence, precision livestock farming, the kinds of recommendations that systems make for menus and so on and so forth. But it would also mean that like there's probably not that much for people doing animal-related work to be doing in the short run. Yeah.
The main point against that is just optimism about how widespread this technology would be. So, for example, if you think there may be religious concerns about clean meat, or there might be reasons why people don't adopt it in the way they haven't adopted other existing technologies like GM crops or something, then it does suggest there's something to be doing. It's just a different set of things to be doing.
Sorry, absolutely. It's just, but that's not AI focused.
Yes.
That's just like double down on getting people to be open, get over neophobia. And yes, I'm absolutely into that, but it's just a totally different project.
We have one question from the audience.
Absolutely.
So Richie asks, do the arguments that you presented mainly apply in the current dominant use case of an Oracle or Copilot, where we just ask AI stuff? And do these arguments change when we consider future AI agents that do stuff in the background, often with small amounts of human supervision, such as Genie or Sovereign's style AI?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely as much an issue in that case. In fact, in some sense, it's more of an issue because the way I think about it. Oh, okay. Now I have to direct my attention differently. But so I think it's even more of an issue in that particular case, and the reason is straightforward. That again, if you had a particularly animal-friendly AI and you've given it some level of autonomy such that it can be making choices in the background and actually structuring an environment or what have you, again, small weights on animals or like relatively small weights on animals should get pretty significant practical implications such that you would really have this concern among ordinary individuals about the adaptability, the usefulness, the degree of alignment of that system. That being said, it's also true that it's possible that like the more subtle the nudging is, that you can have more effective methods of shifting people in animal-friendly directions. However, of course, subtle nudging is often going to be the kind of thing that isn't going to produce massive level effects. It might produce what is in absolute terms a large impact in the aggregate. Yes, right? So again, it's not that we aren't going to see, when we're thinking about trillions of animals, right? Small impacts matter. So I don't want to make it sound like it's not any impact. However, I think what I'm hearing in animal advocacy circles is a lot of interest in putting energy resources into making more animal-friendly AI. My worry is that this is actually just detracting from the kind of animal advocacy that we know works, even if it's slow and even if it's frustrating and not that much fun, because actually the truth is no one really enjoys going and harassing McDonald's and trying to get cage-free commitments out of them. But like that's one of the few things we know that actually does something in terms of improving the world for animals. So I think that's what I'm responding to is I think excitement about AI that I want to temper at least to some degree. Yes.
In our discussion here, not just your talk, but maybe some of the questions are largely based on the scenario of animals being used in factory farms. But what about other animals in the future, such as the wild animals, or maybe there could be other new scenarios that cause people to factory farm animals other than wanting to eat them. For example, there are people who are interested in using animals to raise our replacement organs. So what if we have cultivated meat to replace all factory farming for food, but we just come up with another type of factory farming that will provide organs to us? So I guess my general theory about AI is not specific to how AI will, cause us to harm more or less farmed animals, but how they will treat all the sentient animals in the future, which the AI system will have an impact on. And there we can talk a lot about how the AI's attitude toward animals will impact the animals it affects.
So, I think my response to this is going to somewhat parallel what I was saying to you. I'm so sorry. What's your name? Benjamin. So, I think Benjamin's point to be that, hey, once people are not consuming animals, then we're going to have changes in attitudes, or at least it's possibly we'll have significant changes in attitudes toward animals at that point. And that would just be opening the door for more animal-friendly AI models, precisely because the individuals training them and with whom they need to be to some degree aligned would themselves be more animal-friendly. And so I share that worry, and my only shred of hope is that what we will see is attitudes toward animals shifting more dramatically once factory farming, in say 10,000 years is less of a thing, or 25 if you are more optimistic, as Benjamin was suggesting. But I think I don't disagree with you at all about where the bulk of the value is, or the bulk of the potential harm is. I take it that my point is not really about that, but just about what the prospects are for shifting the kinds of models that we're building in the relatively near term, shifting the priorities of the models we're building in the relatively near term. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna resonate more on my point. Maybe I think that if you have some credence both in the transformativeness of AI but additionally on some value logging. So if the current values or the values of the next 10 years are especially transformative, even if the values evolve to be more friendly towards animals in the future, it may be especially important to include animal friendliness into AI systems right now. And I think that the likelihood that this community and more communities similar to this one achieve that we can significantly increase the chance that these kinds of changes to AI systems in favor of animals are implemented at a regulatory level, either for state actors or AI companies. I think that we can make a significant difference, and especially when you take into account that I think that there are good reasons to believe that the amount of non-human animals in the future may be astronomical. If you take seriously, I'm worried about spreading wild animal suffering into other planets, especially I think.
Right. So let me reformulate what you just said somewhat differently. You could think that in expectation, the future is large and negative because it includes massive amounts of wild animal suffering and or other kinds of animal suffering. And you could think that in a situation where that's a risk that's what we're currently staring at, is that prospect, because we're concerned about lock-in and so on and so forth, that even a very small chance of steering us away from that kind of future is one that we should take. And so you could think that, well, the EV, the expected value of even almost certain to fail attempts to make slightly more animal-friendly AI is going to be very large and positive and worth pursuing in that context. And, it's a good objection. It's worth taking really seriously. I think it's getting at very fundamental questions about how we make decisions in advocacy and elsewhere, about the degree to which we ought to take really big bets with very low probabilities of success, and the degree to which we think we can make kinds of predictions about the likelihood of lock-in or what have you, such that we can be reasonably confident that the expectation or the value of the future is anything in particular an expectation. The people I work with at Rethink Priorities, who are really excellent, including Arvo in this room, have written a lot about issues that are relevant to this, and I don't want to steal their thunder, and you should read their work and see the way they try to map out some of the uncertainties that we might face that are relevant to thinking about this. I will just say, I think my own inclination is to be pretty skeptical of going all in on what appears like high EV bets. And I want to be a lot more confident that the movement did something positive for animals, even if it turns out that the strategies we pursued were lower EV.
Right. That's all the time we have for questions. Thank you so much.